The story is set in 16th century Korea. During this tumultuous time, the Korean society is in turmoil with constant wars, and the ruling power of the Joseon dynasty is controlled by powerful families. The common people suffer greatly, struggling to even afford a meal. Within the walls of the royal palace, the deceased king's mouth is filled with drugs and fresh blood. A silver needle is inserted into his forehead, and a white smoke envelopes his body. Miraculously, the king awakens, but his eyes have turned white, indicating that he is no longer a normal human. He becomes a bloodthirsty creature, attacking anyone he encounters and breaking free from the iron chains that bind him. The ministers are terrified and retreat in fear. The transformation of the once noble king is the result of a conspiracy orchestrated by the Prime Minister, Jo Hak-jo. The Prime Minister's son is the commander of the royal guard, with control over the movement of palace personnel. His daughter is the queen, already pregnant. If she gives birth to a male child, the Prime Minister can secure his position as the rightful ruler. Before the child's birth, the king dies, and according to the rules, the crown prince, Lee Chang, should ascend the throne. However, Jo Hak-jo, determined to hold onto power, summons the royal physician, An Hyun, to revive the king using a resurrecting herb, known as the resurrection plant, until the queen gives birth. Unbeknownst to him, the queen is not actually pregnant. It is a ruse to secure power. She keeps dozens of pregnant women in her palace, providing them with luxurious meals. Her plan is to claim one of their newborn boys as her own. On this day, An Hyun and his apprentice are called to diagnose the king. An Hyun warns his apprentice not to look up while treating the king. As they approach the palace, they hear beast-like sounds and a foul stench emanating from within. Curiosity gets the better of the apprentice, and he looks up, only to be immediately grabbed by a gigantic hand and pulled inside the palace. With eerie screams echoing through the palace, the atmosphere becomes increasingly sinister. The following day, hundreds of notices written in blood appear on the streets of the capital, clearly stating that the king has died and a new king should be enthroned. Muyong, the commander-in-chief in charge of investigating the case, is ruthless and merciless. He swiftly kills the patrolling guards without hesitation. In a society where literacy is scarce, and considering the meticulous planning behind this large-scale operation, it is evident that there are political motives at play. Muyong takes the initiative to capture all the students from nearby academies and subjects them to brutal torture. However, none of the students reveal any clues. Finally, one student, unable to endure the pain, speaks up and reveals his true sentiments. He asserts that the greatest villain in this dynasty is not them, the weak scholars, but rather the corrupt and greedy nobles who wield power. He specifically points out Prime Minister Jo Hak-jo. At that moment, Jo Hak-jo emerges from his house. He orders the imprisonment of all the scholars and demands confessions. He declares that anyone involved in spreading rumors will be executed without mercy. He interrogates the kidnapped students, inquiring if the crown prince instructed their actions, as it would benefit him the most. The crown prince, Lee Chang, kneels outside the queen's palace, pleading for an audience with the king. However, the queen, once again using the king's illness as an excuse, rejects him. Aware that the Joseon dynasty is on the brink of change, the crown prince realizes he cannot sit idly by. He must learn about the king's current condition, or else death awaits him. He sends his guard, Muyong, to steal the king's medical records while he sneaks into the palace under cover of night to investigate. The silent palace feels eerie, with beast-like screams echoing through the corridors, accompanied by a foul stench. As the approaching creature draws nearer, Lee Chang grasps his sword for self-defense. Just as the monster reaches the door, the lights suddenly go out, intensifying his anxiety. Slowly, he opens the door to check, only to find Muyong, the commander-in-chief. Undeterred, Lee Chang breaks into the king's chamber, only to encounter Prime Minister Jo Hak-jo standing there. Powerless to confront him directly, Lee Chang retreats to his own chamber for the time being. Fortunately, on the other side, his guard retrieves the king's medical records, but there were only a few simple pages in it, and the rest were completely blank like white paper. This clearly indicated that something significant was being concealed. To make matters more suspicious, Guard Muyong discovered that the royal physician who treated the king was An Hyun, who had resigned and returned home 3 years ago. Lee Chang immediately decided to go to Dongmi and find An Hyun to get some answers. Meanwhile, on the other side, An Hyun returned to the medical clinic carrying a coffin. He had built this clinic for the homeless people. Due to the government's inaction, famine had struck Korea, and many people were suffering from a plague while unable to afford even a full meal. When the people saw physician An Hyun returning, They approached him with confusion, wondering what had happened and why only one person came back instead of two. However, when they opened the coffin and looked inside, they all stepped back in shock. Lying inside was On Hyun's disciple, whose body appeared to have been devoured by a wild beast. Master On Hyun instructed his disciple, Seo Bai, to prepare for the funeral. Seo Bai, who was unaware of what had happened, hurriedly caught up with her master to ask what had transpired in the palace. Her master merely glanced at her without saying a word and turned to enter the house. Meanwhile, Crown Prince Lee Chang was rushing towards Dongni with his guards. Only the royal physician, On Hyun, could provide him with the answers he sought. He needed to obtain evidence to rescue the Confucian scholars imprisoned in the jail. The next day, Seo Bai went to the mountains as usual to gather wild vegetables. However, she found that all the wild vegetables had already been eaten, and only tree roots remained. Reluctantly, she started digging. When she returned to the village in a hurry, she noticed smoke rising from the medical clinic. She felt frustrated, wondering if there was anything left to eat. She hurriedly returned to the clinic. To her surprise, she found the people inside the clinic not only had meat soup to drink but were also eating meat with big bites. Witnessing everything before her eyes, Seo Bai felt like she was in a dream. Realizing what was happening, she immediately rushed into the kitchen and saw Yangshin tending to the fire. Yangshin told her that he had hunted a wild deer in the mountains himself. However, Seo Bai knew very well that there was no edible food left in the mountains, let alone deer, but despite her hunger, she didn't think much and served herself a bowl. Enticed by the aroma of the meat coming from the pot, suddenly, a dropped finger startled her, and she screamed in horror. Realizing that the people were eating human flesh, she rushed into the courtyard and saw people devouring the meat with large bites. Unsure of what to do, at that moment, she noticed Yangshin, the deserter, sitting nearby and not eating. Knowing that all of this was Yangshin's idea, she grabbed him by the collar and took him to the storeroom. She questioned how he could be so cruel, as their deceased junior disciple was their family member, now being consumed by people. Yangshin argued back, stating that the situation had reached such an extreme point. Once a person dies, they are merely a shell. Since the government no longer cared about them, shouldn't they try to survive on their own? While the two engaged in a heated argument, a violent change occurred outside the door. The medical staff and patients who had just consumed human flesh began to vomit and convulse, making wild animal-like noises from their mouths. In less than 3 minutes, the entire medical clinic was filled with lifeless bodies. The girl, understanding the situation, walked out slowly. She noticed one of the men still foaming at the mouth and on the verge of death. She immediately approached and attempted to save him by stuffing a white cloth into his mouth. Unbeknownst to her, a corpse behind her inexplicably stood up. With a scream, the two who had been arguing in the storeroom heard the commotion. Yangshin was about to go out and investigate but was knocked down by an unseen force. Blood seeped through the door crack, and as they looked through it, they saw that the medical clinic had turned into a living hell. The female physician who had been treating others had become food for the zombies. The next day, the Crown Prince and his guards had arrived near Dongni. They entered a deep mountain, and the Crown Prince sensed something abnormal. The entire mountain was eerily quiet. Not even a single mosquito or bird chirping. They quickly found the residence of the physician On Hyun, but the medical clinic was already in ruins. As they entered to investigate, they discovered that both the roof and the courtyard were filled with sharpened bamboo poles, stained with blood. As if to prevent some kind of creature from escaping, they entered the rooms of the medical clinic to inspect, finding them equally dilapidated. Accidentally, Lee Chang stepped on a wooden board, causing it to break and fall to the ground. It was then that he realized the floor was filled with corpses, intertwined like twisted ropes. They immediately called local officials, who came and removed all the bodies, taking them back to the government office and arranging them in a row. However, after examining their identities, they discovered that the royal physician On Hyun was not among them. To investigate what had happened in the medical clinic, the two of them went to nearby residents to inquire. They heard from a hunter that there were survivors in the medical clinic. After the incident, he had seen the physician Seo Bai running into the mountains, following the lead. They found Seo Bai in a cave. Lee Chang asked her about the whereabouts of the royal physician On Hyun. However, Seo Bai revealed that everyone had died in the disaster that night. From their conversation, Seo Bai also learned that all the bodies in the medical clinic had been removed. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, she hurriedly ran back, but Lee Chang stopped her. He informed her about the medical records left behind by their master, documenting a plant called life-death grass that could treat the current symptoms. That's why she had hidden in the mountains, hoping to find the life-death grass to save people. But but now there was no time. She had to immediately go back and stop the officials from releasing the bodies. Meanwhile, Yangshin, who had returned from chopping firewood, also discovered that all the bodies in the medical clinic were gone. He had done it with good intentions, wanting to feed people so they wouldn't go hungry, but he hadn't anticipated that it would lead to the death of everyone in the medical clinic. He rushed into the government office and warned everyone that the bodies would soon wake up and bite people. They must be quickly locked back up. The leading magistrate considered him a madman and was about to arrest him. Xiao Bai, who had arrived after hearing the news, knelt before the magistrate and desperately explained that what Yangshin had said was true. Once the sun sets, these people will revive, and they will bite anyone they see. Seeing that sunset was imminent, she urged everyone to escape quickly. However, the magistrate not only didn't believe their words but also suspected them of being responsible for all the deaths in the inn. As a result, he locked them up in the dungeon. Meanwhile, Li Chang also returned to the medical clinic, hoping to find the medical records that Xiao Bai mentioned. He had a hunch that his father and the people Xiao Bai mentioned had the same symptoms. If he could find the records, the truth would be revealed. But when he arrived at the medical clinic, he found Muyang waiting for him. It turned out that they had been secretly monitoring Li Chang's movements and knew he was there to find the royal physician, An Hyun, so they followed him. Without any hesitation, they drew their swords and faced each other. This time, Muyang wouldn't show any mercy. His main goal was to kill the Crown Prince Li Chang to eliminate any future threat. In the fight, Li Chang was clearly no match for Muyang and quickly fell in defeat. Just as Muyang was about to finish him off, there was a commotion from a box in the room. Muyang's subordinate cautiously approached to investigate, but the person who came out of the box bit him directly, and he was none other than the royal physician An Hyun, who Li Chang was searching for. The subordinate was bitten to death on the spot, and An Hyun then pounced on Muyang, biting him and causing injury. The Crown Prince witnessed this scene for the first time and was frozen in place from fear, but as soon as he regained his senses, he quickly picked up a stone and smashed the monster to death. However, Muyang, who was bitten, also began to mutate. He stared fiercely at Li Chang and then lunged at him directly. Li Chang hastily picked up a sword from the ground and beheaded him with one strike. At the same time, strange things were happening at the government office. Everyone gathered at the entrance to witness the spectacle. One of the masked men watched in astonishment as the bodies mysteriously started moving. As night fell, to the amazement of the onlookers, the bodies stood up in extremely contorted ways. Among the crowd, a man recognized his own wife among the resurrected bodies and rushed towards her, only to be bitten. All the bodies began to awaken, and the people finally realized the danger and scattered in all directions to escape. Ironically, the prison became the safest place. Hearing the screams from outside, Yangshin knew that the zombies had come back to life. Taking advantage of the guards' inattention, he directly broke open the door and fled.